Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of the HR Tech Chat video podcast. And I'm very happy to have with me our guest today, Jeff Andes, who is VP of Talent at University of Phoenix. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Brett. Happy to be here.
Yeah. We have a lot to talk about today. I know we have some cultural transformation, very positive cultural transformation at University of Phoenix that sort of commenced several years ago. And that has had an effect on various processes and talent management, performance management being one of those, and some of the more modern approaches to it. And I'd really looking forward to delving into it with you. Perhaps you could share with our audience just sort of a brief background on who you are, where you come from, and this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Jeff Andes, and I lead the talent team at University of Phoenix. I've been with the university for about 12 years, all in HR roles, specifically over the last 5 years, leading the talent team, from talent management to acquisition to learning and development, internal communication, and other programs. And I've really learned a lot over the last 12 years in this role at University of Phoenix, because we've been going through a wider range of changes. We were a public company, went to a private company. Our stock has kind of been all over the place when we were a public company, from when I started to when we went to a private company, went through that transition to a private equity firm, and changing our culture as part of that. So it's been a great learning experience, I think, for myself, for the entire HR leadership team, how we can manage change effectively and impact culture.
Yeah. Really interesting stuff. And I should share with our listeners or viewers, excuse me, that we've actually had a previous conversation around all of this, and it really is fascinating. Maybe you could take our audience to sort of the beginning, where the story that we're talking about really began. I know it had to do with the university, the change in ownership, and a new leadership coming in. Maybe you could share that story, because it's really interesting. I think it's fundamental to HR transformation, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started with the university, we had about 15,000 employees, 30,000-ish faculty, part-time faculty. And that was, about 12 years ago. And then for the next 7 years, our decline kind of started. And we went from, 15,000 employees down to about 3,100, 3,200 employees, 30,000 faculty down to about 5,000 or 6,000 faculty. And our stock price was sliding at the same time. And one of the things, putting myself into an employee's shoes, one of the things that the way it felt like we were talking with our employees was as if kind of things were okay. It was, that corporate speak, that corporate kind of spin, that, no big deal. Yeah, it was kind of a big deal. We were seeing a lot of our colleagues and our friends leave the organization. Our stock price was sliding significantly, but we weren't a culture that was what we are today. We were a culture where it was, kind of buttoned up, and much more old school, much more corporate centric versus employee centric. And so when we ended up selling to a private equity firm 5 years ago, they made the decision to take the assets underneath the company that we were owned by at the time, which is Apollo Education Group, and separate them and divest them. So we became a standalone University of Phoenix organization for the first time in several decades. And it was an opportunity. It was an opportunity to kind of revisit who do we want to be? And we went through a process with new leadership coming in as part of this private equity deal, new president, and several other new executives, to kind of step back and say, what do we value? And who do we want to be? What do we want this culture to look like 3 years from now? You can't change culture, obviously, in a quarter or two. But, we talked like 3 years. What do we want that to look like, and what do we value? So we went through an exercise, really including our employees, our faculty, our executives, to identify what are University of Phoenix core values, and let's start there and build our culture from that perspective. And our core values, there's several different ways in my research and my experience around how companies select core values. Some companies, really weigh heavily on the employees and in our case also faculty to help kind of decide and identify what those values are based on what they see and feel and experience every day. And some companies kind of weigh more heavily on the executives. And I kind of played a role where we landed a little bit in the middle, but slightly to the leadership side. And the reason being with that is because I wanted to make sure we got the voice of our employees around what they see and feel and believe the values are of the university. But I also wanted to make sure that the executives were bought in and they believed these values. Because like anything, especially in change management, if it's not supported at the leadership level and it's not really believed, it's not going to go anywhere. So we ended up establishing our core values in that way, and that really facilitated a number of things within our organization as it relates to culture change, including our talent management, performance management process. So that's a little bit of the backstory. The other side of the backstory is specifically when that new president came in as part of the transition to private equity. Him and I had a conversation around a couple topics, and one of the topics we talked about was performance reviews. And he basically told me, in other words, I don't want to do performance reviews at University of Phoenix. And I'm like, great, we don't want to do them either. that is something we want to move away from. And as we thought about our values, which are brave, honest, and focused, and we thought about that vision that we set on that whiteboard around who do we want to be culturally 3 years from now, a static performance review process that is annualized, that's done at the end of the year, where managers sit down and review the past 12 months, the typical thing, give a rating, put a label on you. We just didn't feel like that aligned with our values of specifically around being honest and transparent, and the culture that we wanted to shift. We wanted to shift to a more fluid, ongoing, employee-centric culture versus kind of a static corporate culture.
I like that word fluid. I was thinking it just as you said. I said, it was really interesting. I was also going to ask you, my next question was going to be, how do you change a organizational culture, and then you went into a really good explanation of how you really start that process, because that's a big question, right? That you have a culture. Every organization has a culture, right? And there's a need to, and you may have a desire or need to change it. What are the steps you take in it? And it sounds like you sort of solicited a lot of feedback from all stakeholders in the organization to really make sure that that you understood what the culture was and what it could be. And what I'm also hearing is that maybe the previous culture was sort of a misalignment, or sort of the right hand not speaking to the left, maybe between the leadership and the rest of the organization. That's what I hear sometimes when I hear corporate culture. Does that resonate?
Yeah, and I think companies just have to evolve, right? And shift, and otherwise you're going to be left behind. And I think that goes for your company's products, but that also goes for your company culture. And we needed to really reflect on that. And one of the things that we reflected on was not just evolving, but also stepping back and looking back to where did we come from? Dr. John Sperling pioneered online education for the world. That was a huge risk that he took. And he was a very innovative man. And we really felt like we needed to bring that innovative spirit back to our culture. And we kind of felt like we lost that a little bit. And so as we think about that as it relates to our business model, that's one thing. But as it relates to our culture as well, we felt like we needed to be more innovative. And when I reflect back on our journey, I really believe that employees want to be able to build trust with the organization that they work for. They want to feel appreciated and have that respect from their leader, from their organization. And they also want autonomy.
Mhm.
And that is those factors, I believe, those traits are continuing to grow in our society today. And as organizations, I think we have to figure out how do we adopt our policies, our processes, our culture to support employees in that way. And I think me, out of all those things I just said, trust is just at the center point, I think, of all out of all of those components that are going to lead to successful cultural change.
Oh, of course. Absolutely. I agree 10%. We've had other conversations on the podcast and over the course, just doing our work here at 360 Insights, where around culture and trust is a word that that is a concept that just comes up continually, repeatedly, and it makes sense. But I also heard transparency and recognition. Being appreciated, recognition. Those are also big parts of an organizational culture. And you know what it also sounds to me. I love the tying it back to your founder and his innovation and his sort of his vision, right? And thinking about University of Phoenix, and it's sort of a new way. At the time, it was an entirely new way, like rethinking the culture of education, of higher education, right? And so it makes sense that you would want your internal culture, like your organizational culture, to kind of reflect that. And what I'm also hearing is that with the private equity acquisition of University of Phoenix and that whole event, it's almost as if it gave your organization a respite or a time, some room to just take a deep breath and really think about things, right? And I was just in an event last week, corporate analyst summit, and they were talking about the value of business and remaining a private company, and these, not knocking being a public company, because there's a place for that as well. But when you go private under the right leadership, you can really start to think about the business's full potential impact, positive impact on society. Not to get too wishy-washy here, but around what is business's full potential positive influence for society beyond how we measure just sort of the quarterly numbers. And so everything you're saying really fits nicely into these other conversations that we're having elsewhere. And maybe this is a good segue, actually, into the next piece of it that we really want to talk about today, and that is the transformation of how you measure or assess those might not even be the right words to use, but the performance of your people, how that has changed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in the last 10 years, I would say in my experience is that, there's been, this shift. And a lot of companies have been going away from annual performance reviews. A lot probably of your listeners and viewers today have already gone away from them. But it feels like even today, it feels like there's still a wide array of mix around how people do performance management. Maybe the biggest array in terms of the mix maybe ever, because for so long it was just the traditional kind of annual performance review, and now there's so many different variations of how companies think of performance management. But we felt like when we went through this process 5 years ago, we felt like, okay, to be honest and live our core value honest and be transparent and to move the business forward, we felt like we needed to have communication with our employees that is built around trust, that is equal between the manager and the employee and in the flow of work. And so we completely went away from the annual performance review, and we completely went away from ratings. We do not rate. We feel like, in our opinion, in our culture, a rating is a label, and a label kind of derails the conversation. You're just waiting to hear, what is that rating? What is that number? Or what is that score? Whatever that is. And we just don't think it adds value to the conversation. So we've kind of gone to this quarterly check-in model where every quarter our leaders have check-ins with their employees and our employees have check-ins with their leaders. It is a 50-50 conversation. We currently today, we use Betterworks and the tool works out very well for this kind of duality of the conversation, but I'm sure there's many other software solutions that might be, good tools as well. We really started without the system in mind. We started with the process, the program that we wanted, the environment, the culture we wanted to create. So our program was really built system agnostic. And that process really is every quarter we create, 3 to 5 at most, but typically right around 3-question template that goes to the manager and goes to the employee. The employee has their side to answer their questions, and their questions are often very different from the manager questions. Typical performance review, I think it's these competencies, manager rates these competencies, and employee rates these competencies, and it's the exact same question or competency or value. You're just getting 2 different perspectives. We don't do it that way. We really target questions to employees and target questions to managers. And both sides can see the responses to those questions. But really, it's less about the questions and the process. It's more about the conversation and getting employees and leaders together. And so we know that our leaders and our employees have one-on-one conversations, maybe weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, whatever that might be. But oftentimes that is the day-to-day tactical project updates, barrier removals, those types of things. We wanted to make sure we had 4 times a year where you can kind of step back a little bit, reflect on how things are going, and really focus on how we can be successful moving forward together. And so we ask in a number of our check-in questions on the employee side, we typically ask them questions like, what can I, because it's coming from the manager, what can I, as your manager, do better to support you? Or how can I be more effective in helping you achieve success or greater success? Because we really do believe that this is an opportunity for employees to give feedback back to their managers around how they can help them be successful. And then we have, the typical manager questions, and they're just suggested questions. They're not prescribed questions that you have to fill these out every single quarter. They're just suggested topics where they can give a reflection on how things are going, or give a viewpoint to, hey, here's where we need to go. Here's the outcomes we need to achieve as we move forward. Let's talk about how we get there. So we really tried to create a culture where we're equals. Of course, a manager at the end of the day is responsible for the output of their team. That does not change. They can't delegate. They can delegate work down, but at the end of the day, that manager, that director, that VP is responsible. So it's not like we're all equal and whatnot. Managers get paid X for a reason. They're in a bigger job for a reason. They need to lead that team. But we are all humans, and we can work together to achieve those outcomes. And we wanted to create more of that together culture. Managers and employees are successful together. So that's kind of the basics of our process. And then we from a documentation perspective, we ask our leaders at University of Phoenix to document at least 1 a year. We send them every quarter, but we really focus more on the conversation. We let them know best practice is to document it every quarter, because oftentimes I might think I'm saying something to my team member, but it doesn't actually come out of my mouth, and or the employee hears something different. So documenting is important, but we are not building our process around documentation. We are building our process around this, having a dialogue and a 2-way conversation, because we think that builds trust, that builds effectiveness in the relationship moving forward.
Yeah, you're saying so many really interesting things right now, and I want to put just a quick placeholder because you said we're all humans, right? And that's a really important piece, and I think that would be a nice way to tie back to some of the other things that happen culturally at the organization in terms of tangible changes, visual and otherwise. So I want to get back to that, but first off, couple of things that occurred to me as you were sharing how the process changed. Getting performance enablement, we'll call it performance enablement. I know that's what Betterworks, which you use, calls it. Getting it into the flow of work, so important. And also figuring out what the flow is going to be before making a decision on what technology to use. That's super important. You could go with a great technology, but if you don't have a good process laid out or thought out, the benefits may be negligible. We've seen that plenty of times, and scores and scores of deployments. But the other thing that's interesting about what you said is it made me think of almost a headline. You need to get into the flow of work to get out of the flow of work, because when you describe those discussions, you talked about tactical. There's all sorts of tactical interactions between managers and their staff over the course of any given day and week. Those happen all the time. But how many reflective sort of just stepping out of the flow for a moment here to just have those necessary, very beneficial discussions about career and just sort of the deeper things of work. Those can't happen if there isn't a flow and a sort of a structure that's actually there. That's the other thing that's so interesting, right? There's continuous performance enablement or check-ins or sort of continual interaction facilitated by technology for performance, to track performance or keep up with performance. The annual performance review process, that is a structure, but it's a very poor structure. So we're not talking about removing structure. We're just talking about, sort of implementing a new, better structure for it. I think that's where I'm going with that. And so that just strikes me as super interesting.
Yeah, and we believe that leaders need to be leaders. And we need to empower our leaders, just like our employees want to be empowered. We need to empower them to be leaders. So we like to provide them with tools and some structure, but we don't want to dictate to every single leader, this is exactly how your conversation needs to go. Because every employee is different. We're all humans. None of us are the exact same. We're all in different situations, different environments at different points in time. And one leader might need to focus more on, performance, because that's maybe a challenge, or they need to increase that. And another leader at that same time might need to spend some time focusing on reflecting on how can we support your development, or how can we, in this, last couple of years, how can I, adjust different parts of your responsibility or your schedule or whatever it might be to accommodate your needs outside of work, because it's no surprise everybody on this that's listening to this, I'm sure every one of them are concerned about retention. So there's no cookie cutter, but we wanted, to your point, to have some framework that our leaders could then take and be leaders. And one of the points of feedback, to kind of just dovetail on this a little bit, one of the points of feedback I often get is, well, how do you guys do merit? Like, how do you do compensation? If you don't have ratings and you don't have this formalized annual process, how do you do merit? Well, we follow the same philosophy that I just said, which is leaders, let them be leaders. We believe that if you ask a leader, who are your top performers and who are your bottom performers, they're not going to need a rating scale to tell you.
Right.
Most leaders know these 2 or 3 people or whatever it is, these are my top performers, and these are my mid performers and these are my bottom performers. We believe leaders know that. And if they don't, that's a different discussion. Why doesn't that leader understand the performance of their team members, right? So we let them be leaders. Again, we guide them. We give them some tools, like we give them, their compa ratio and where their salary is and compared to their peers and where it is within the range and all that good stuff. Give them recommendations if they're a high performer and they're at, X or Y compa ratio. You might think about giving them, this range type of thing. We give them guidance, but we don't force that to be done based on a performance review rating. So it's really around empowering our leaders to be leaders.
I love that because there's all different permutations of good leaders. All leaders aren't exactly the same, and right, some of them may potentially think in rating, sort of in a rating schema, right? But others might not at all, and yet they all, if they're good leaders, you're right, they know who their best performers are and why, who their middling performers are and why, who their struggling performers are and why. That's such a great point. I'm loving the culture that I'm hearing about University of Phoenix. I really am. I know that there were some changes to decor or even furniture moving and this kind of stuff that happened. And I want to touch on that, and then maybe get a little bit into what it's like, what it's been like collaborating with Betterworks.
Yeah, absolutely. So culture is, as you kind of hit on earlier, it's made up of a million little things, right? And maybe some big things too, but it's everything. It's a million little things, and it takes time to shift a culture one way or the other. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's purposeful. I think oftentimes, especially good cultures, it's very purposeful around creating a strong culture or a desired future state culture. And I give all the credit in the world to our executives, and specifically our president that came in at the time, and being very purposeful around shifting that to little things like you talked about decor. Our organization 5 years ago when we went through this transition, like I said, a very corporate, very kind of old school. You come through the front, there's security, you go through turnstiles, you go up elevators, every floor you got a badge into to be able to get access to the floor. You go up to the executive floor, which is the 10th floor in our building, and there's another security guard, and you walk up there and you kind of feel like, you're in this environment that, like, the FBI or CIA up there, like, asking you, like, why are you here? Who are you here to where'd you get the approval type of environment? And our new president is like, no, all that's got to go. Like, again, we want to be honest and transparent. We want a culture of, we're all in this together and we're all humans. And yes, we have different job titles and responsibilities, but we're all equal at the end of the day. And so, removed outside of the basic security of, going through the turnstiles and security out front, removed all the badging on all the floors. Removed all the security from the top floor and the extra walls that were up there that was kind of protecting the 10th floor executives. Tore big, huge, massive windows into the executive or the president's office, and so there's complete open transparency. We had blinds on all of the leaders' offices that you could turn and twist and close off visible access to it. Remove all of those. We had an elevator that went from the ground floor to the 10th floor that was largely for the executives and the president to take a quick trip up to the 10th floor, but it also removed them from the normal people, their employees put all the work, removed them from that. We just changed all that, got rid of the blinds, opened things up. Our executives started with our president, started eating in. We had this really beautiful cafe on our campus, and started eating there with folks and talking with our folks. Opened up our leadership call to all employees every other month. Half of that time of the leadership call now is open to Q&A. We used to get maybe 1 or 2 questions. Now we have to follow up with like 50 or 60 people after the call to get all the questions. And people ask, crazy questions about, about the facilities. Like, there's a toilet not working on the 7th floor of building whatever. Are we fixed? We'll answer that. We might not know the answer, but we'll take any question, strategic down to very tactical, because we want to know what's important to our employees. And our president really led that by leading with his actions and all those decisions that he made, and so many more. But those give you a little bit of a flavor that I think aligned with the cultural change that we wanted to create.
And I love the old elevator, so the quick elevator just goes to the 10th floor. That's yeah. Those are great changes. And it gets me to thinking about um, just very briefly here, thinking about, what is it, chicken and egg thing, right? Which comes first, or does anything come first? You talked about culture as a million, just a million different things, or I think that's the term you used. And you're right. And yet at the same time, you can do all the heavy lifting conceptually to shift the culture in the right direction. But then you need the right tools in place to make sure that you can perpetuate the positivity that you've started. Maybe that's a good segue, in terms of, not getting into the nuts and bolts of the functionality, because I think everybody watching this sort of can envision it. But what's it like working with Betterworks? Their vision, and how has it helped to sort of perpetuate the changes in this moving positive culture?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, as I've talked about honest and transparency being really core to our transformation, I look for vendors that I can partner with that are going to be the same way with me. And so that's kind of been the biggest thing with Betterworks is, I've been able to establish a strong relationship with some of their senior leaders where I'll want things and I'll ask for things to evolve or be fixed or whatnot. And they'll oftentimes tell me, yeah, we're going to work on that. And oftentimes tell me, no, we can't do that, or that's not in scope of our focus right now. And that transparency is an honesty both ways. I'll tell them what they're doing great at, and I'll also tell them hey, I think you're falling short on this. And they'll give that back to me equally around. They're not going to just tell me, yeah, Jeff, we'll work on that because I'm a customer and make me happy, and it never comes true. They'll tell me if they can, and they'll tell me if they can't. So I really, really appreciate that transparency, because I look with that in vendors. I think any vendor that comes alongside you has to be a partner. And I don't look at them as vendors. Any vendor, Betterworks, any other vendor that I work with, I think that's a really important trait for me, because that aligns with our culture, right?
Yeah.
And you need vendors and partners that align, I believe, with your culture that are going to help accelerate that transformation. So as we talk about the tool in of itself, the tool aligns with our culture. It is a tool that is, very much has the ability to work in the flow of work when leaders need to use it, how they need to use it. So when we think about, the ability to give feedback at any point in time, our employees can give feedback to team members, to project team members, to their leader, any point in time that they want to. They come out of a meeting, they want to give some feedback. Hey, here's some great things you did, or hey, maybe think about this next time as you approach this type of situation. They can do that. Now, look, I do not encourage that as the only way to give feedback.
Right.
I think a system is one way.
Yeah.
Personally, I'm more of a pick up the phone kind of guy, because I'm a relational guy, and I'd rather call that person, and then maybe follow up with, a documented kudos or documented, hey, maybe think about approaching it this way next time. But the point around the Betterworks solution is it has the ability to be in the moment, in the flow of work, whether you talk about recognition or appreciation or feedback, positive or constructive, as you think about check-in conversations, as you think about one-on-one conversations and documenting those when you want to in the flow of work. That is what has really worked out for us. Also, from a goal setting perspective, we are not an OKR shop, and Betterworks has a huge OKR component, but the tool is so flexible that it works for goals. And in fact, some of our teams use OKRs at University of Phoenix, and some of them use kind of traditional goals at University of Phoenix, and it works for both. So again, in the flow of work, because we don't prescribe a lot of processes, we give frameworks to our leaders and allow them to be leaders. So one part of the business can do OKRs, and the other part of the business can do goals in a different way, and it works for our company. So it has the tools and framework for our leaders and our employees to operate it, to manage their performance in the way that that function manages their performance. And it looks a little bit different from department to department at University of Phoenix.
Yeah, yeah. I'm here. It sounds like their culture is very reflective of the solution they provide, open, continual interaction, which is, it's really the only way to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting stuff. I'm looking at the time, and I think we've gone a little bit long, which is fine. But thank you so much for joining us. Any sort of parting thoughts or anything that you'd like to share?
Yeah, look, I think I saw a stat the other day that said, 30, I think it was 31% of employees, when they're asked like what they wish their managers would do more, the biggest chunk of that, there was, I don't know, 10 different options. It was 31%. I think the second one in line was like 17% or something like that. But 31% of employees said they wish their managers would show more appreciation.
Mm.
And I think that is something that we at University of Phoenix can continue to do better, and as organizations, we can all continue to do better. But I think appreciation, starts with where I started, and I'll kind of end with that, which is leaders' ability to build trust. Companies can institute and build all kinds of processes, frameworks, systems, tools, but at the end of the day, we're still humans, and humans working with humans, it's all different. And it really falls on that leader to build that trust. The processes can be there to support it, but how does that leader build that trust? And I think part of how that leader builds that trust is investing in their employees, having conversations, ongoing conversations. It doesn't always have to be about performance or work or whatnot, but truly caring about their employees. And I think through that, appreciation can continue to grow and build in those relationships, because that leader is shown as trustworthy, that they care about that employee and they want to invest in that employee. And so as companies and organizations, how do we continue to guide leaders and set up structures and frameworks that can encourage those connection moments, whether it's, and it gets to performance and helping, enable performance and whatnot. But I think it starts with just being a good human and caring about your team members. Because at the end of the day, I don't think there's anything more taxing than having a team member that doesn't want to be on your team or is low performing. So how do we invest in those relationships at the very beginning? And I don't think there's a silver bullet, but I think we all can continue to get better at that and work at that. And I know that's something that we're going to be doing here at University of Phoenix.
Yeah, beautifully put. We are humans working with humans. Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jeff, for joining us. This has been a fantastic episode. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Have a good one, Brett.
You too.